Our guest today, our next speaker is Marc van Ameringen. He is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, also known as GAIN. It is an alliance that is driven by the vision of a world without malnutrition, as we go to speaking about the regional approach to the issue of malnutrition. Under his leadership, since 2005, GAIN has become a leading player globally in efforts to end hunger and malnutrition. In 2014, at the World Economic Forum's annual assembly in Davos, the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon awarded Marc with the World Food Programme's Hunger Hero Award for his efforts in combating world hunger and malnutrition. In 2010, he received the Visionary Award from Helen Keller International for GAIN's strategies and innovations in reducing global malnutrition. Now, the Committee on World Food Security, as you know, stresses the importance of this multi-stakeholder process for achieving sustainable agriculture and good nutrition. The regional interlinkages and instruments and mechanisms are vital to achieving these ends. I said to a side event we had just a few moments ago talking to young people, I was talking to these young people and I said, you have the two things needed to succeed. You have the urgency and you have the opportunity. And I think that same thing applies in this particular case. I looked through some of the case studies and found references to the need to assure the safety of food across multiple ministries in government, of fighting malnutrition while improving community resilience, of improving contributions of fisheries and fish products to food security and nutrition, of considering the role that climate plays through all of this, in using data to inform programming and policy, in bringing these same multiple stakeholders to the table to address deforestation and connect deforestation with nutrition. So how these things are done and how malnutrition is addressed is the subject of our speaker's talk. So, Mr. van Ameringen, welcome and thank you.
Madam Chairperson, delegates, and participants, let me first start by expressing my strong support for the leadership of the CFS and really this whole inclusive approach to dealing with food and nutrition security. For the last 10 years or so, I've been leading the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, which is one of the first multi-stakeholder partnerships that was formed at the UN Special Session on Children in 2002, really to try and galvanize action. And I think over the last 10, 12 years, we've been able to see that there is lots to learn from multi-stakeholder partnerships, but if we want to get to scale, they are really quite important. But I'm going to focus my talk quite a bit on nutrition, and I think as I look at malnutrition today in the world and look at the challenges we face with a nutrition lens, it's clear that almost every country in the world today is facing some form of malnutrition. People here know the statistics better than anyone. You know, we have 795 million people hungry or undernourished. We have almost 160 million children who are stunted. We have over 2 billion people who are suffering from hidden hunger. And we have now, according to the estimates from WHO, 1.9 billion people suffering from overweight and obesity. True, there are many different drivers behind these statistics, but we really have to take note that almost one out of every 2 people on the planet today is suffering from some form of malnutrition. The recently released 2015 Global Nutrition Report that really looks at the performance of every single country came to the conclusion that we face a significant crisis, whether the countries are facing undernutrition or whether they're facing overweight or obesity or whether they're facing the double burden of malnutrition with both of those. And it's also clear that these challenges are being significantly exacerbated by the unprecedented humanitarian crisis we are seeing around the world today and climate change. But we must conclude that this food system from a nutrition side is really broken. It's not addressing the challenges of malnutrition, rather it's leading to greater malnutrition. And I think the other thing we have to draw the conclusion is that the food system itself won't self-correct unless we develop the kind of new forms of engagement at the global level, at the regional level, and the national level. So how are we doing at the global level? I think we're doing, pretty well certainly looking at it from a nutrition side, given where we were 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, here, this platform many years ago wasn't really talking much about nutrition. And today we see a very integrated agenda of food and nutrition security, and we also see a very inclusive platform, which is, again, very important if we're going to deal with this challenge. We also see the scale-up nutrition movement, which at the global level and national level has become a real movement. We have 55 countries who have signed up and are doing scale-up plans, and we have networks for every stakeholder group under that. We have the Zero Hunger Challenge. We have the ICN2 action plan, which 170 countries made commitments to. So given where we are today from where we were 3, 4, 5 years ago, it's really quite significant progress at the global level. And most of these have become multi-stakeholder platforms. We have to ask, well, are they all aligned? Not really. Are we pretty fragmented still across these different initiatives? Yeah, probably. But we're moving forward. I think that's the key thing. We're not letting that lack of alignment or fragmentation stop us from making progress. And so I think that's some really good news that certainly from the nutrition side, we need to take stock of. But we do need to say, how can we improve this? How can we get more of this alignment at the global level? It is important, I think, that we use the opportunity of the SDGs and SDG2 to really look at, is there some way to build more coherence at the global level so that we can reach that target of ending all forms of malnutrition by 2030, but in a much more common approach than we have today. What does that look like? I'm not sure, but I do think it's something that we need. If I shift from the global level to the national level, which has really received the most attention over the last few years on the nutrition side, we do, as I said, have quite a number of countries who made commitments under ICN2. We have scale-up plans underway at different levels under the sun. In 55 countries, we have quite a range of multi-stakeholder partnerships in nutrition. But I think more importantly, we have seen progress in the real statistics on undernutrition. We have 39 countries on course to reduce stunting, and some dramatic results in countries like Ethiopia, Tanzania, now most recently Ghana, and dropping dramatically stunting. Something we didn't think was going to happen for a generation has happened in 5 years. But we also see, many countries, 67 countries on track for reaching their wasting targets. Interestingly, there's not one single country on track to reach obesity reduction targets. So a lot happening, but still much to do. And I think also as we look at platforms on the ground, we still do not see a clear integration between agriculture and nutrition. Some are bringing together these into a common framework, but many countries are still facing siloed programs, and it's very difficult to bring together often a permanent Secretary of Agriculture and Health with a common framework. But in some places, it's certainly happening. But I think one of the biggest obstacles we're facing as we start to get these scale-up programs at the national level is that we don't have the investment needed now that we start to have the plans in place. And that investment, whether it's from governments, whether it's from donors, or whether it's from the private sector, we have a major gap. So on one level, We're seeing greater coherence at the global level. We're seeing more in the way of plans at the national level, but we aren't seeing the actual investments plans being financed in a way that is going to allow us to get the kind of results that we need. So if I shift from looking at, the global and national, really to talk a bit about the regional level, and do we start to have kind of platforms looking at the regional food systems that bring nutrition and food security together? And I think, unfortunately, the answer is there are really very few. There's lots of different projects. I think we saw in the case studies different examples of, of partnerships from the African Union via NEPAD, starting to introduce nutrition into CADEP, to some private sector-led initiatives around food safety, to some governments in Asia looking at zero hunger and coming together. But we don't really have that many models around the regional level beyond specific projects that are integrating. And I do think this is something that we need to put on the agenda. What should those models look like? Should we, for example, start to look a bit at other sectors like we've seen around sustainable palm oil, where we actually have a large roundtable platform bringing together 1,700 different stakeholders at all aspects of that value chain, looking at dealing with the issues in its totality. Are those the kind of directions that we need to go on? Or is it simply that we need to be building food and nutrition security platforms around the regional economic platforms that are already in place? So build out a multi-stakeholder platform around a structure, for example, in Southern Africa, like a SADC. Is that the way to go? But this hasn't been on our agenda, and it's really something that I think we need to get our heads around, because many of the problems are at the regional level. They're beyond one country. And we actually see the trade agreements that are being signed right now are affecting food and nutrition outcomes. I don't think we have to go as far as the TPP, what we think will happen, but we can see in many sub-regions that, the trade agreements are actually defining some of the futures without actually having a nutrition lens or a broader nutrition and food security strategy underneath them. So let me just shift to say a few things, about multi-stakeholder partnerships to implement the Sustainable Development Goals. I think a lot of us were in New York the last few weeks everybody's talking about multi-stakeholder partnerships. And I think if we are going to implement SDG 2, we really do need to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel, because the last 15 years, particularly under the MDGs, many players have been working on multi-stakeholder partnerships and have learned a lot of what works and what doesn't work. And certainly that multi-stakeholder partnerships are not a panacea for everything. They are useful in certain circumstances. But we have learned that, we need, for these partnerships to work, government needs to be at the core of them. They cannot be just a regular member. We know they have to be inclusive. We know they have to address conflicts of interest up front. We know they have to have transparency rules. We know they have to have clear targets and performance measurement to work. But we also know that they need kind of backbone structures, something like the Sun Movement or other structures to actually help make them happen and enable them. I want to close by saying a couple of things. First, we have to really focus on how we can move more quickly than we are today if we are going to reach this 2030 target of ending all forms of malnutrition. I think we have to be positive to where we've gotten to the last 3 or 4 years at the structural level. But what we have to achieve on the ground is really going to take a new form of organization and a new form of energy. We do need to look at, as we build these new multi-stakeholder partnerships, how do we make them more inclusive, and how do we get better alignment amongst the players? And this is really something, as we look to SDG 2, do we need to bring together some structure that would allow us from a nutrition side to bring the Committee on Food Security together with the Sun Movement, with the ICN2 Follow-Up, Zero Hunger Challenge, at least so we're optimizing all of these different platforms around a common goal. But let's not take our eye off the main goal, which is really, are we moving the dial in high-burden countries? Are they reaching their targets around malnutrition? Are we reaching women, children, and the most vulnerable? I think for this to happen, we also need to be saying, how are we going to leverage more investment? It's not just going to come from innovative finance mechanisms, which often recycle IDA credits in new ways. It's going to come from real new investment from ODA, from governments and donors. It's missing right now. And I think, as I said, we do need to put the regional multi-stakeholder partnerships on the agenda and start to look at what those could look like. You know, hearing Mary Robinson this morning close with a quote from Nelson Mandela reminded me of how important Nelson Mandela saw collaboration and engagement across all groups of society, no matter how much they loved each other or not, to address the important challenge of ending apartheid. I mean, I spent 10 years of my life working with Mandela and the ANC on ending apartheid, and you know, even during the darkest moments of apartheid, there was always a move to engage, to discuss, and that was going on at multiple levels. And I'm reminded also by the chair of GAIN, Jay Naidu, when he was struck when he started to work in nutrition and found that stakeholders were not prepared to sit together for a very long time. And his comment was always that, you know, if we had never engaged and negotiated with the apartheid government, we would never ended apartheid. And I think that's where we need to go. As we move forward, we need to be building those platforms that allow us to engage and negotiate and deliver the kind of results with communities suffering most from malnutrition. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Mark, why don't you stay there? We'll stay standing for a bit, and then you can take a seat when we open it up to the floor, as we did this morning, if that's acceptable with everyone. That works? Yes? Let me start, Mark, by asking you a little bit more, and to draw you out just a bit, on what you were speaking of in the context of the global versus the regional versus the country level. Specifically, perhaps you could discuss in some more detail what needs to be done at that global level to differentiate and to move the other and the regional forward.
Yeah, I think at the global level, I think we never had before, but today we have the structures in place. We have a lot of the platforms coming, and we are now very much focused on how do we support the national level. And that's where the big problem still is, that a lot at the country level, many of the plans are not there, or they're there and they have no funds behind them. And that's where we're seeing the stagnation in many of the statistics as we go forward. And so one level, we have to find even more ways to support the national level. The other point is that many of the challenges, as I said, cut across many countries. And they don't, maybe some of them do fall into regional economic communities, but many of them don't. If you're looking at cocoa or tea, some of the commodities. But we don't have, sometimes we have private sector leading on different issues, but we don't have new structures that have legitimacy, that bring together those kind of stakeholders, as they have had to do in palm oil. And you've seen incredible progress on palm oil because of that. But where are those other structures like that cut across a number of countries or cut across different value chains? So I think, I think we're struggling with that. And we're struggling also because we don't have a lot of the capacity we need to actually implement many of the strategies at the country level. And I think that also calls us to look for more regional approaches to how we're going to support these transitions.
You spoke about the multi-stakeholder approach and the necessity of that, which is quite so. But as we were talking about earlier, it's not a done deal. There is plenty of space in certain areas between these various stakeholders, between and among them. So could I ask you to think about and share with us your thoughts on what's the problem, what's the challenge? Maybe I'll take you into what's the solution.
Well, I think a lot of people say, though, that, multi-stakeholder partnerships just a code word for public-private partnerships, and that is just a code word for, capture by industry of the agenda. And I think that's in some cases has been true in some certain cases. We can't deny that. We look around the world, but I think so. We have to actually make sure that as we move to these kind of partnership frameworks, there is a whole rules-based regime in there, and that we have guidelines, that we have whole processes in place, and many of them don't have that today. And I think
how difficult would that be to do?
Well, I mean, it's again, you'd have to negotiate out what that means. What is a conflict of interest? If you were to have that palm oil example without Unilever there, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, they were one of the biggest players. They brought it together. Under the rules that many use, they would be in a conflict of interest because they did have an economic interest in sustainable palm oil. So, I think we have to be clear, are some of these interpretations being used to exclude people, or do they have real conflicts, and then we have to find a way of dealing with them. But I don't think they should be used to stop us from sitting down together. I think the other problem is, we do need strong leadership to make these things happen, and legitimate leadership to do that. So we don't have that everywhere, the leadership structures to try and drive these kind of partnerships. I mean, again, I've used the Unilever example. How many other sectors do you have that? Not many. So I think we have to be very selective. These are not solutions to everything. They are solutions to some parts of our agenda, but we shouldn't say everything everywhere we look. And that's one of the issues, I think, for many of us who are in New York. Everybody who had a multi-stakeholder platform hammer looking for a nail to hit, and it's really wrong, is that many things work through multiple different modalities. This works in some cases, particularly for highly complex problems, but it's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself.
I want to ask you one more question and then open it up to the floor, if I might. And this is on something that you said that I found quite interesting, and that is the notion that we need to build into trade agreements this idea of reflecting nutrition as we contemplate trade agreements. Well, having just come from Washington, where there's a trade agreement that's in the middle of quite an uproar, I can imagine layering on yet another level of challenge, and yet it makes eminent sense to consider nutrition when considering agricultural trade and all the rest. So what are you talking about, and how do we get that so that can achieve the political consensus it would need?
Well, I think it comes with some degree of recognition that, trade liberalization isn't good in all cases. I mean, certainly we have many cases in the Pacific Islands, Mexico, parts of Latin America, where liberalization has meant, destruction of local diets and even more healthy diets that were there, and has led to more availability of more unhealthy processed foods being consumed. Now, maybe, that wasn't intended or not intended, I'm not sure, but that, then suddenly, many of us who work in this sector are left with the health consequences of that. So it may have led to better deals for some players in there, but so it's always saying, well, yeah, sure, a rules-based system, the dough around is good, but what does it mean on the ground from a food security to nutrition security? When we're really looking at it from how to, those statistics I mentioned at the beginning, how do we move those statistics? And so as we look at these different agreements, are they going to help those people who are most vulnerable? Or, if you have billions of people suffering from hidden hunger, is it going to help or is it going to hurt? I think that's more the lens, rather than it's saying it's going to be good in all cases to take down tariff walls, liberalize, etc.
Okay. Thank you very much. Would you join me in thanking our speaker? And if you take your seat, and we'll go to the questions and comments, and then come back to you as needed. And again, if I might, if you can be succinct, we can get more voices in. And I see the representative from Bangladesh. Sir.
Thank you very much. This time I do not like to miss the train, so I raised the flag a little bit earlier. Mr. Moderator, thank you very much. And before to my intervention, I would like to thank for your brief statement regarding the issues. Mr. Moderator and the report here, or the presenter, actually you have said that you are the visionary leader to see the globe one day without malnutrition and hunger. So today we have 793 million people undernourished. Why? This is because of, there are so many reasons. Because there are the poor, because of they are the poor, they do not have the money, we do not have sufficient food to eat or nutritional aspects, because they do not have the power. Why actually they are poor? Why they do not have this money? All this question, and this is because of the climate change effect, this is because of the protein, energy, malnutrition, even including the obesity. And at the same time, we found that a lot of food is wasting and misused during harvest, post-harvest, and even also the dining table. So I have a very straight question to you. But before that, I need to ask myself, ourselves, I have a strong doubt about the commitment of the people or the global leaders. Actually, we want a globe without hunger, without malnutrition, or we want to continue at least a subsistence level so that we can discuss, we can make papers and so on. So my question is to you state, what are the most critical factors of the malnutrition, and how the regional food supply system could remove or improve the nutrition system? Thank you, Moderator. Thank you, Presenter.
Thank you for your question, or questions, because there's a great deal there. Let me take another question, and then we'll come around the room and recognize the gentleman from Pakistan. Oh, we're not hearing you, sorry. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. And we would also like to join the presenter for this nice presentation. Nutrition is a major challenge which is confronting the Asia region, which is why our region is supporting a work stream on nutrition in the upcoming multi-year program of work of CFS. Now, we think that regional cooperation would be one way of dealing this challenge, including through knowledge and sharing of knowledge and best practices. But at times, even this is difficult to achieve. Now, in your remarks, you have raised issue of alignment amongst various stakeholders dealing with nutrition, which is really a challenge both at national, regional, and international levels. So, in your view, what role can CFS play in creating such alignment, especially at the regional level? Thank you.
Let me ask you to take these before we move on to others, because both of them are big and ambitious questions. The first, what are the most critical factors and how to improve them? Gentleman from Bangladesh.
Well, I think the single most critical factor is government leadership, and I actually look at the government of Bangladesh as being one of the real leaders here, and we just can see that from the way the data shows us on malnutrition, how much stunting has dropped, how much micronutrient deficiencies have dropped. And that has really been because of the strong commitment to reach the vulnerable people, to provide subsidies in some cases to support, things like fortification of oil, despite, sometimes industry not liking it. But I think it's leadership that we're missing, and that understanding at the highest political level. Like Sheikh Hasina gets this all the way down. I think that's why we've seen a change today. And I think so. In many places, we don't have that same level of understanding. And I think Yeah, I think the extent to which this is also reflected in the extent to which, your government plays a role in the global architecture around these issues. I think that to try and drive this agenda. But I think on the issue of what's the role the CFS can play in the region, I think it should be trying to convene much more at the regional level the key stakeholders and bringing together some of the key platforms. And I think there are challenges. I mean, my organization has a major program, exporting fortified wheat from Pakistan to Afghanistan to deal with some of and other commodities. You can't really deal with some of the challenges in Afghanistan without dealing with some of the relations between food exports and the quality of those. So it's just one example, but there are many others. So we do need to think of, what are the regional challenges that we want to solve? What's at the top of the list? I mean, advocating more for those governments to take this on to the extent so that it's a core of their planning is I think is something else that the CFS could do, because the advocacy has really picked up pace in many countries, and I think particularly the Sun has been excellent as an advocacy platform. But it's going to the next level and actually integrating, what are those strategies now? Are we going to deal with this? What are the low-hanging fruits that some of these issues are very complicated, and they run into trade rules. They impact with conflicts that are going on, et cetera. So I think it's what is the low-hanging fruit. From the nutrition side, we focus that very much on stunting, and we treat stunting as a key poverty indicator as well. So if stunting is moving, we know we're on the right track. So I think, Pakistan has one of the highest levels of stunting, India as well, Afghanistan. I mean, that region has a lot of the, probably 2/3 of the stunted children in the world are sitting in those countries in that region. So, I think if the CFS were trying to convene much more at the regional level around how do we take on that challenge, I think a lot of other things would follow from that.
Thank you. Understand from civil society, please.
My name is Gisela Duting from IPFAN, International Baby Food Action Network. I was very happy to hear Marc van Ameringen mention, yes, address conflicts of interest issues up front, because as civil society, we would like to emphasize the need for the CFS to put in place effective regulatory mechanisms to protect CFS from undue corporate influence. We are very worried when we speak about stakeholders, non-state actors, that this tends to blur the fundamental difference between public and private interests. Opening the door to corporate sector involvement risks to divert the attention away from the root causes of malnutrition. And I was happy to hear the representative from Bangladesh mention, why are people poor and malnourished? Because we risk putting in place technical and market-oriented profitable solutions, like, for example, the fortified wheat example that you gave, instead of addressing root causes. And we also notice that by funding academic research and placing industry-linked experts on advisory committees, panels, and boards, the food and beverage industry sector and related philanthropic foundations bias the science in favor of industry interests. So we are very concerned about that, especially as it impedes any meaningful debate about their contribution to malnutrition in the real world. So we really need effective regulatory measures, domestic, international, and as well as at the level of the CFS. Don't we risk the same type of policies that lie at the heart of malnutrition For example, an example of my own organization, which is campaigning against aggressive breast milk substitutes, finds international baby food corporate sector right there, while it's at the same time speaking about protecting breastfeeding.
Thank you very much. Some very interesting things. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Let me, in the interest of keeping the conversation going, Burkina Faso, I believe, has a comment. Where is the representative there? Yes.
Merci, Monsieur le modérateur. Permettez-moi de remercier le conférencier pour son brillant exposé et la...
Thank you. Go ahead.
Permettez-moi de remercier le conférencier pour son brillant exposé et la maîtrise du sujet très pertinent et d'actualité pour la planète entière et particulièrement pour le groupe africain au lendemain de l'adoption des ODD. Thème portant sur l'amélioration des systèmes régionaux d'approvisionnement en denrées alimentaires et processus visant à améliorer la nutrition. Monsieur le modérateur, je prends la parole au nom du groupe de la région Afrique. Sur les 4 études de cas concernant ce thème, celui portant sur l'intégration de la nutrition au plan d'investissement du PDA a particulièrement attiré mon attention. Monsieur le modérateur, comme vous le savez, le programme détaillé pour le développement de l'agriculture africaine, PDA, constitue le cadre régional mis en place par l'Afrique en 2003 pour stimuler l'investissement agricole sur le continent. La réalisation de l'OMD 1, qui était de réduire la pauvreté et la faim grâce à une croissance nourrie par l'agriculture, était au cœur du PDA. Les progrès accomplis en production et productivité agricole ne se traduisent pas automatiquement en progrès de la nutrition. Ils peuvent même avoir parfois des effets négatifs sur la nutrition. Alors que l'engagement politique pour la nutrition grandit, les interventions en sécurité alimentaire et en agriculture doivent être conçues spécifiquement pour répondre aux problèmes de nutrition fortement pris en compte par les ODD plus ambitieux et récemment adoptés à l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. Au regard de toutes ces attentes fondamentales, le nouveau partenariat pour le développement de l'Afrique, NEPAD, et la Commission de l'Union africaine ont lancé une initiative pour renforcer les capacités en nutrition à travers l'organisation de 3 ateliers de travail sous-régionaux intéressant l'ensemble des pays africains et qui se sont tenus entre 2011 et 2013. Ces ateliers avaient pour but d'intégrer la nutrition aux plans nationaux d'investissement agricole en collaboration avec les communautés économiques régionales et avec le soutien de l'USAID et de la FAO. Monsieur le modérateur, les ateliers de Dakar au Sénégal en novembre 2011 pour 17 pays de l'Afrique de l'Ouest, de Dar es Salaam en Tanzanie en février 2013 pour 18 pays d'Afrique centrale et de l'Est et de Gaborone au Botswana en septembre 2013 pour 14 pays d'Afrique australe ont permis aux participants de renforcer leur compréhension du rôle que joue l'agriculture pour l'amélioration de la nutrition, d'intensifier le dialogue et l'entente mutuelle du rôle spécifique de chaque secteur pour la nutrition et de concorder sur des étapes pragmatiques pour les actions nutritionnelles sur le terrain. Selon le NEPAD, l'évaluation de ces ateliers a montré que l'un des principaux résultats est l'intégration de nos jours de la dimension nutrition dans les plans d'investissement agricoles nationaux. En effet, la plupart de nos pays ont révisé leur politique agricole nationale en intégrant la dimension nutrition. Monsieur le modérateur, le groupe Afrique salue et partage les travaux d'enjeux majeurs réalisés sur l'amélioration des systèmes régionaux d'approvisionnement en denrées alimentaires et processus visant à améliorer la nutrition. Je vous remercie.
Thank you very much. Why don't I ask you, Mark, to comment on that last one first, and then we'll go back to the CFS, or to the civil society group.
Okay, the last one first. No, I really, merci pour le commentaire. I really agree, that the actual integration of nutrition into the agricultural priorities has been the key issue. It's something I worked on for many years, of trying to see how can you integrate nutrition much more effectively into CAADP. And I think the first round this was done around 2007, 2008. I think as you had all the regional meetings of permanent secretaries of agriculture, they rated nutrition as an issue like number 30 or 40 on their list. It was very low priority, and it's because of very low awareness. And it's interesting, now where we are today, 7-8 years later, that it's now actually integration is very much on the agenda. And I think it speaks to the fact that there is much more awareness of the importance of nutrition. But I still think we have a problem of, a lot of those agricultural strategies are under ministries of agriculture. And a lot of them think they're dealing with malnutrition by improving productivity alone. And they see nutrition as a health issue. And so I do think we still need at the country level the kind of leadership that can drive the integration between that permanent Secretary of Agriculture, that permanent Secretary of Health, so they actually have a common agenda, and that stunting reduction is on the agenda for agriculture. A lot of them have resisted that, but if there is an integrated agenda, then there shouldn't be any worry about that being on the agenda. So I think it's much more a leadership issue, and I think we've made progress slowly the last 6-7 years, but I think we need to move much more quickly now that finally that a lot of those investment plans actually have some investment coming in to fund them. So it should try and make some of those investments conditional on addressing both the productivity side of it, but also the quality and access issue, particularly from the nutrition side. So on the first, can I go to the first issue?
Civil society.
Yeah, I do think, I think regulatory mechanisms are one of the ways to go, because it does create the kind of rules-based approach that everybody needs to agree to, but it shouldn't be used to keep the private sector out of the conversation, which is often how it's framed. And there is no scenario that I can see that we're going to fix the food system if there isn't some engagement process and some negotiation on everything from breast milk substitutes, to imports of unhealthy foods. So I think regulation should be on the agenda. And fortification, if I look at the success that we've had around food fortification, it's because governments have made it a law, and that's why. And, it has, so now many countries who don't have a food system that provides access to a diversified diet for all people are getting some share of their nutrition through those programs. So I think the other point is, as there is always a threat of capture by the private sector. I wouldn't deny that. I think we've seen cases of that. But I think it's what are the kind of rules that we put in place so that doesn't happen? What are the kind of mechanisms that we have there? How do we deal with those conflicts of interest? So I don't think these are problems that we cannot deal with. I think what we have seen in nutrition for 30 years is that there has been no engagement, at all with the private sector. And If you look at the issues of breast milk substitutes, you know, many of the companies continue to violate the code and life goes on. Well, that shouldn't be the case. That we should actually have some way of moving forward on some of these agendas. And I think that's why we do need regulation, do need rules, we do need transparency and conflict of interest. But we do need to sit down and engage and negotiate some of these issues, because they're not going to go away. I think as food systems are moving in the direction, you know, of becoming more industrialized, not less, and populations are going to be more in cities, you know, it's going to be more difficult to get access for many people, poor people, to a healthy, diversified diet that's affordable. So I think we have to engage.
You spoke about what it will take to do that and strike that regulatory balance. Do you have thoughts on what that would actually look like to move it from where it is now to address
Well, I think
this issue?
we need these kind of agree on what are these kind of platforms look like. And I mean, the UN agencies have a key role to play, you know, as representing the international public good in this, as do platforms like the Sun, like the CFS. So I don't think they can only deal with the easy issues. They have to tackle some of the difficult issues so that, you know, our children's children aren't still having the same discussion about, you know, how come we can't get exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months, et cetera. You know, those shouldn't be the same debates that they relive.
To the private sector mechanism, please. Sorry, your mic is not on. Try again. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dave Crean. I am the Vice President of Corporate R&D for Mars Incorporated, a global family-owned business with interests in food, drinks, pet care, chocolate and gum. We are a global company, but we seek to manufacture and source high-quality raw materials locally in order to create mutual benefit for the communities in which we operate. As we look at food security in regional and local supply chains, one of the challenges we see is food safety. Unsafe food has a number of impacts. It creates a public health burden, especially among women, infants and children. It degrades cognitive capabilities from childhood stunting, tragically reducing future social and economic potential. It prolongs the poverty of farmers by reducing productivity, trade and income. It reduces national GDP growth and prevents exports. We believe that if one aspect of food contamination, aflatoxins, are not properly addressed in Africa, that any progress in both health and economic development will be severely hampered. Aflatoxins, a silent killer, threaten the UN Secretary General's goal of ending hunger and malnutrition by 2030, and thwarts the implementation of key elements of both the SDGs and the 2014 ICN2 Framework for Action. Mars and others have tools, capabilities and expertise which we are keen to share, but no single entity can address the complex issue of food safety. At Mars, we believe that the best long-term solutions will come from collaboration, and that the private sector must participate in multi-sector, multidisciplinary partnerships with a range of stakeholders. Each partner has something to contribute that is of mutual value for solving the problem. We have seen this in action across 60 partnerships and through our partnership in the UN CFSS as a member of the private sector mechanism, and our participation in the Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network. Recently, Mars took a step further by opening a global food safety center in China, specifically designed as a pre-competitive platform for sharing critical knowledge and expertise. Let me close by sharing one company's perspective as a takeaway. The sharing of tools, capabilities and expertise of all sectors, governments, civil society, business, research, foundations and universities are essential in addressing food safety and, by extension, the challenge of food security. Multi-sector, multidisciplinary partnerships and collaborations are the best way to enhance food safety. We have the knowledge to begin to control aflatoxins, but partnerships are critical for developing sustainable long-term solutions. International organisations and governments must enable and encourage these relationships to increase access to safer and more nutritious foods. I know that each of you are committed to achieve zero hunger by 2030, but we will never achieve this if food is unsafe. Indeed, if it's not safe, it's not food.
Thank you. Would you like to, before we move on, would you like to comment on that? And do you have a, I didn't hear a question in that or something that prompts a specific response. And if you'd like to add that, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'll turn to Mark to comment on what he heard. Go ahead.
It was really making a statement about the role of business, the importance of collaboration, and that unless we do that together, it's going to be very difficult to face the challenges that we're facing in food security.
Try again. There you go.
I think, I mean, we are, again, was partnering with the African Union and others on this food safety platform. I think these are the kind of areas where the private sector is playing an exemplary role. It's a pre-competitive, it's open to many partners, it's dealing with the kind of huge challenge we face around aflatoxins and mycotoxins. And so that's really the kind of things that we need more of. And they're very unique in the nutrition space. I mean, there aren't many pre-competitive activities that go on in this sector. So I think I think we also need to recognize that when we look at the SDGs, the price tag is about $3 trillion, and official development assistance has been going down steadily for the last 3 years. So we do need to look to where some of the new investments are going to come from for some of the things that we think are really critical in the food system of the future. And so we actually, I mean, this is an example, a facility on food safety that's open to all to use. I mean, can't think of any other things like that in the food security and nutrition space. But that's the kind of thing that we need, and we should welcome.
When you were talking about your partnerships and to play off of this point in your talk, in your speech, you referred to the fact that government needs to be at the core, you said, and that we need backbone structures. So to take these various interests and take them to that next level, what specifically is needed?
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think, I mean, government is critical to being in a lot of these partnerships because they have the legitimacy, they're voted in usually. And they represent the people. So, I think I agree that some of the non-state actors are, they have different interests, but government has that legitimacy. So it's very hard we need that legitimacy in these structures. But if you take food safety, we're facing a big crisis. I mean, somebody explained to me, all that food that's rejected for aflatoxins that goes to Europe just gets sold on the market in places like East Africa and elsewhere. It doesn't get destroyed. And that's because we don't have very strong systems in place in countries to ensure that food safety. So we do need to think of what are those structures going to look like going forward. And I think some of these initiatives like the private sector should be part of that. But we do need to have, be thinking carefully, what is that food safety structure going to look like as we get, as we deal with also more industrialized food available, that we don't have contamination, that we are ensuring that it's not rich people who only have access to quality assured safe food and poor people who are getting food that is less so. And that's the world we could end up in unless we start to think of some architecture more broadly around food safety, which this facility would be a key piece of.
Thank you. I'd like to go to two countries next, Côte d'Ivoire and Iceland. Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Monsieur le modérateur. Je voudrais profiter de l'occasion pour féliciter le Burkina Faso qui prenait la parole au nom du groupe Afrique. J'ai une question à poser. L'année dernière, nous avons eu la conférence internationale, la deuxième conférence internationale sur la nutrition, à laquelle conférence ont pris part une part active le CSA, le SON, beaucoup d'organisations et les deux autres agences des Nations Unies à Rome. Mais, monsieur le conférencier, je voudrais poser une question simple. Est-ce qu'il ne faut pas mettre en place une synergie d'action? Parce que ici, je constate qu'à chaque réunion qui se fait, la question revient pratiquement dans les conversations ou dans les discussions qui se font au niveau de la FAO ici. Parce que quand nous regardons ce qui se passe, dans le cadre d'action qui a été approuvé l'année passée durant la CIN2, nous nous rendons compte que tout avait été mis dans ce cadre d'action, que le gouvernement d'ailleurs a approuvé ici avec la conférence des ministres et ensuite le cadre d'action pour pouvoir avancer sur les questions nutritionnelles. Et dans le cadre d'action, il était très clair que dans les échanges commerciaux, justement, qu'on tienne compte des facteurs nutritionnels, de ce qui se fait en termes d'échanges entre les différents pays, en fait, au niveau commercial. Mais je me rends compte finalement, monsieur le conférencier, que est-ce qu'il ne faut pas tenir compte des instruments de suivi et évaluation sur les questions nutritionnelles? Il ne faut pas renforcer, est-ce qu'il ne faut pas renforcer les instruments de suivi et évaluation sur les questions nutritionnelles? Parce que si nous rendons compte, on vient de terminer avec les OMD. Maintenant, on est passé aux EDD. Ce qui a manqué à beaucoup de pays, en général en Afrique, ce sont des instruments de suivi et évaluation qui ont manqué à beaucoup de pays africains. Ce n'est pas la productivité, parce que quand on remarque bien, beaucoup de pays ont produit. Mais très souvent, qu'est-ce qui a manqué à ces pays? Il a manqué à ces pays des instruments statistiques fiables pour pouvoir dire, voilà, nous avons produit tant, nous avons consommé tant. Et sur les questions nutritionnelles, je terminerai sur cela. Maintenant, dans nos pays, on a pris conscience qu'il ne faut pas seulement produire, mais il faut tenir compte aussi de la valeur nutritionnelle de ce qu'on produit ou de ce qui est consommé. C'est pour cette raison, je voudrais savoir si, par rapport à la question de suivi et évaluation, s'il ne faut pas mettre en place un système de synergie au niveau international pour évaluer tout ce qui se fait au quotidien sur la nutrition. Je vous remercie.
All right, I'm going to break my rule because I said we'd go on to the next question, but I think that one is so interesting and so important that we should get right to it. So, please.
Oui, merci. It's a difficult set of questions that you're asking because I think I think at the global level, it's very difficult to harmonize the whole international system, and I think many of us would like to see that, and it's been on the agenda for many, many years, and I think we still need to drive towards that. And I do think some of these platforms like CFS cut across that system and actually create more synergy, because you're not talking to all the separate agencies who are involved, from WHO to FAO to UNICEF to WFP, you know. So I think that's where the benefit of these platforms are, because they force more synergy. But I think the other two points, I think in terms of the follow-up action, I think where we'll see the biggest impact of success or not is not at the global level, it's at the country level. And I do think there are some new mechanisms like the Global Nutrition Report, which is looking every year at the performance of each country. But, you know, as certainly from a nutrition side, the issue we face is we have terrible data. You know, we just do not, I mean, I think somebody was talking about earlier on that how poor the data is of just knowing what people are consuming and, you know, what is having an impact, which or not in which region. And I think we're still, you know, a lot of us have argued that we need a data revolution to deal with food security and nutrition so that we can actually track much more quickly what is the impact we're having. And I think there is definitely it's definitely more and more feasible to do that with technology. I mean, I just think when some of the big national programs that we invested in the beginning. We had to do a baseline study and an end-line study 3 years later to figure out what was wrong. Well, today there are new tools and technology where you can find out quite quickly whether the program's working or not. So I'm optimistic about that, but I think we should focus on seeing the progress at the country level and getting the harmonization at the country level. I think the global level is going to take some time, but at the country level, governments are at the center of that. They can drive that agenda.
Thank you. Iceland.
Thank you, moderator. I'm going to step a little bit out of the box. And before I do that, I can tell you that I asked our chair if I could do this, and she said yes, and it's better to follow that. I have a question to you. And before I come with the question, I would like to thank, of course, the keynote speaker and for his speech and all questions that have been answered by him. But this question came to me this morning when we were discussing, and we are still discussing, kind of the same challenges. These are big challenges. There were climate change, there's hunger, there's poverty. And then it came to me a recent study done in more than 20 countries on climate change and what is moving us or what is not moving us. And the research was really saying that people, we are not scared to action. It was sort of the main finding that all the gloomy pictures and we get, and we have a lot of them here, all the data, it's not scaring us to action. That's something that is, I think we should think about. There were other things that got people really to think about climate change and action. So my question is, where do you see media in all we are discussing here? I mean, we are here governments, we are here civil society, private sector, and we are all with a dialogue, and this is a very special forum to do that. But having you, distinguished professor and media person, can you give us a little bit of your view? Where do you see media come into all this? Thank you.
So the chair put you up to that, huh?
No. I just requested my advice.
I am fond of saying at the beginning of my talks, I am from the media and I am here to help, which no one believes. You ask a tremendously complicated question, and I believe an excellent one. And media coverage varies from one place to the next. I think we cannot paint media with a broad brush because of different national sensibilities and different types of media, and Rupert Murdoch is not Ted Turner, thankfully, and there are so many different personalities. I will say a couple of things, and then we'll go back to the speaker. First of all, this is very complicated, and media are not good in many cases at dealing with complicated stories. Simple is better. Proximate, something close, is better. This is both complicated and it is distant. Too many of the stories about climate invoke science, and in many countries and many parts of the world, science is distant or held with some suspicion or not fully understood. Scare stories work with some, but they don't work with most, and in fact many in the environmental movement in the United States have concluded that the very negative cast to a lot of what the environmental movement has been about, framed this topic about, has actually been counterproductive and has driven the political polarization, so that it is now, this is now can be perceived as you're against jobs or you're pro-regulation, which polarizes the debate further. My suggestion to everyone is that we need to engage media on all levels, recognizing that media exist on different levels: local, regional, national, and global. That we need to recognize that this is not just one story about climate change. And in fact, I had a session that I convened with several American mayors, and I said, how do you talk about sustainability to your citizens? And they said to me, to a person, I don't use the word sustainability. I talk about money that can be saved if you use less energy. I talk about shade that will cool the city if you have more trees. We put that in the interests of the people. So to the extent that the stories are more complex and put in the interests of the people and brought down to that level, rather than merely being about this broad, vague, strange theme, that seems to have some resonance. And finally, I say this: everybody is a storyteller, and everybody must tell stories, whether it's you as officials and delegates and representatives, and stakeholders, or it's people, citizens, business leaders, students. I just had this meeting with young people, and I told them, you are all storytellers. So that the stories, the richness of the stories, come through. And then finally, I think that climate change is not a theoretical thing. We are seeing changes now, and to speak more in the present tense as well as the future tense also can make it more real as a story. But the media is not one creature. And so anyone who's dealing with it needs to recognize that and respond accordingly. Madam Chair, I was not prepared for that, so last round. Private sector.
Chair, my name is Olga Speckert. I'm the head of Global Insurance Solutions for the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture. I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak on behalf of the private sector mechanism. Smallholder farmers grow most of the food produced in developing countries. They are at the heart of providing for food and nutrition security at the regional level. Yet farmers face important risks that can undermine their livelihoods and the food security of their communities and nations. Processes and mechanisms that help address those risks are essential to enable farmers to invest and increase productivity sustainably. Weather index insurance is a risk mitigation tool that is both relevant and affordable for smallholders. Index insurance creates a safety net for farmers. It shifts some of the risk from their shoulders and also improves their ability to access credit. Without risk management tools, smallholders will remain excluded from formal financing. Adopting new technologies involves the risk of extra expenditure upfront. It also means abandoning the familiarity of all waste. Insurance gives farmers extra confidence to take that step. Insurance enables and encourages them to invest more in the farms to raise productivity, increase food security, and improve their livelihoods. Other tools are also important to help farmers and require regional cooperation. For example, access to high-quality seeds can be challenging. In sub-Saharan Africa, important crops such as sorghum, potatoes, beans, and cassava are grown on more than 29 million hectares and support 100 million smallholders. Yet, quality seed of better performing varieties is only available for up to 10% of the area. Strengthening the value chain link between plant breeding and distribution and ultimately seed multiplication can help increase the choices available to smallholder farmers. The Syngenta Foundation has launched a Seeds2Be program which aims to support emerging small and medium-sized seed companies in acquiring and developing improved varieties of a wider range of crops by linking them to public and private breeders. These initiatives can be enhanced by further regional integration that facilitates trade and the growth of agribusiness at the national and regional level. They help build demand and local value chains to enhance food supply. Agriculture is the source of all food. Improving farmers' productivity, resilience and sustainability is essential to improving nutritional outcomes. We need to build systems and processes that promote broad-based, diverse diet and provide consumer choice. This can only happen if we invest in farmers and the tools they need to produce food sustainably. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. To Afghanistan, please.
Thank you, Chair. We know that the concept of regional cooperation is a noble one. No one questioned that. But it's not working. Well, sure, there are some cases of promising success, like ASEAN. But then you have a decade of failure in ECHO. So the question arises, what can we do? I think it's better to make a thorough evaluation of whether the regional structures for cooperation and food security and nutrition are viable and why they are viable and how they should function and what will be the role of the countries participating in this thing. I think this will be money well spent, and hopefully it could be done jointly. FAO, WFP, UNICEF, WHO. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, to the World Bank representative.
For ministries of agriculture to pay a lot more attention to nutrition, and also for the PERMSECs of agriculture to meet with their counterparts from health more and more often. I couldn't help but notice, though, this morning in the session before lunch, there was caution expressed about mandate creep, and perhaps ministries and agencies should stick to what they do best. There may be a case where that's true. However, I would strongly agree with the speaker that nutrition is a place where we need more mandate creep, not less, as is food safety, as is climate change. That's really more of a comment than a question, but just again to thank the speaker for encouraging us to work across sectors. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, one last intervention from civil society.
My name is Biraj Patnaik. I'm from the Right to Food campaign in India. I must say at the outset that many of us don't share the touching faith and enthusiasm that some of us in this room have on the private sector. I'm glad that Mark spoke about the fact that obesity reduction is one area where no country has achieved its target. But on the other hand, you seem to suggest that somehow, now there's a lot of documented evidence about big cola and big food companies and the corporatization of the food chain being a very big part of the problem. The suggestion that somehow bringing them on board in a multi-stakeholder environment is going to solve the problem is alarming. Thank you, Mark, also for reminding us that states have legitimacy, lest someone has missed that point. But states also have obligations. The obligation primarily to respect, protect, and fulfill the right to adequate food and nutrition. And these obligations mean that rights holders expect these rights from the state. Now, private sector interventions make it like charity. They make it like, a situation of dependency on imported or processed foods. How do you expect that to reduce if we continue with the multi-stakeholder partnerships that you've spoken of? You suggested that regulation is an answer, but far too often we've seen regulatory watchdogs become lapdogs under the influence of the private sector because of weak governance systems. So I would say that should the private sector have a seat at the nutrition table? Possibly. But given the past record, we'll need to hear more from you, a promise that you won't eat the table. Thank you.
Well, before I reset the table, I will let you address that very provocative comment and anything else as we conclude.
Well, I think that's why we have civil society there. Strong civil society also shouldn't be a lapdog either for the government or other interests. I mean, we have, we do need strong civil society to be at the table to make sure that, accountability is there for not just the private sector, for governments as well. So, I don't think, there's good civil society and bad companies, and there's good governments, and, in all of these categories we have good and bad and in between, and so I think that's not a reason not to engage. But in terms of large food companies, who are causing more malnutrition, that we can't talk to them or engage with them, I don't think that's the way to go. I think it's pressure, it's accountability. It is trying to find other means to get that kind of transformation. And I don't think leaving them outside is a good idea. You have to find ways to bring them in and to hold to account. And I don't see another approach. You know, otherwise you have a parallel system that's outside of these platforms that's doing what it does with impunity, and where are you then? So, yeah, so I think that's, and the regulatory piece, I mean, again, yeah, I agree. You know, some regulatory systems don't work, but I can point to you a number who do work quite well as well. And sometimes they work over one government, and the next government they don't work. So, again, this is part of the landscape we're in, but it shouldn't be used as a reason not to leave them out and not engage. I think on the proposal from Afghanistan, I think that's a great idea because, you know, I think as going through the literature on how do we use regional platforms more effectively, there really isn't a lot of great examples, and there's certainly no evaluations of what works and what doesn't work. So from a nutrition and food security side, so I think we do need to kind of take stock and think of what could it look like. I think we need something at the regional level. Everybody will agree. How do we do it? Do we, you know, create separate structures around food and nutrition only, or do we anchor them onto regional economic communities, or what? So I agree we need some guidance there. I mean, I think the rest I won't comment on.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking Marc van Ameringen for being here today and for your comments. Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I turn it back to you.
Let's do the same for our moderator, and please sit down for a moment because I tried to summarize this, this interesting session. Also a big hand for Frank Sesno, please. Thank you very much also for yourself, because also this afternoon it was a very interesting exchange of views and interaction. The key messages which emerged from the overall discussions included an acknowledgement that, first, meeting SDG 2 will require broad partnerships with the food and nutrition architecture coming together around common goals focused on achieving positive change. Second, regional and sub-regional multi-stakeholder partnerships can play a role in supporting the national level as many challenges fell across borders. Third, continuing efforts to enhance policy coherence and coordination across sectors Continuing efforts to enhance policy coherence and coordination across sectors through better information systems, rules-based systems, and knowledge exchange that can help to create effective links. You see, we are trying to summarize as good as we can. And fourth, identifying entry points for partnerships and transparent multi-stakeholder collaboration, which specifically address where each stakeholder can add value. Critical success factors in okay, here we go. Identifying entry points for partnerships and transparent multi-stakeholder collaboration, which specifically address where each stakeholder can add value, are critical success factors in improving nutrition. And as we have decided, and you know, we take the summary of the introductory remarks, the contribution of Mr. van Ameringen to be on top of this, but this is a reflection of the exchange. Can we agree upon this? If this is the case, thank you very much. Then I'm happy to thank you again and to say thank you for joining us. Thank you for moderating this interactive session. We close this point on the agenda by one more